support for Ukraine, and this is a wartime summit. So he needs to build that relationship with President Biden, and I hope in the Oval Office meetings they looked ahead to the war, how it's going, and what Ukraine and U.S. plans are. So there's a lot happening with this trip. I'm glad it's taking place. As I said, a wartime summit and a dramatic wartime address to the U.S. Congress. Churchill addressed the U.S. Congress in 1941, and that's one parallel.
And Caitlin, as Ambassador Freed just mentioned, that Churchill analogy, that's been mentioned a few times today, hasn't it, by members on the Hill?
It has. It's been mentioned by members on the Hill. It's been mentioned by the administration. And it is hard not to kind of evoke a lot of that. And you heard Zelenskyy, when he was addressing members of the press in that joint press conference that he had with Biden earlier this afternoon, tried to get Americans to kind of envision what this would be like if this was on U.S. soil, and trying to make the compelling case that the need for allies to stay in this. And this is a historic moment to think about. There's only been a few world leaders invited to speak in front of a joint session. Zelenskyy spoke via teleconference earlier this year. And I was really struck, John, by what President Biden said at that joint presser today when he was asked about the significance of standing toe-to-toe, literally, with Zelenskyy as opposed to a phone conversation, and the message that sends, and the message that Zelenskyy said that it sends across the world, but most specifically to Vladimir Putin.
And Ambassador Fried, I want to go back to that idea of audiences, because as Caitlin mentioned in that moment with the President Biden said that the U.S. would support Ukraine as long as it takes.
Right.
Is one of the purposes of this visit to get that kind of a public statement in front of the cameras, in front of the world, perhaps to keep the spine stiff in Europe, perhaps to send a message to Putin? How do you think this plays in those broader audiences?
The message is to Putin that the West is not as weak as he supposed and hoped. And that's an important message. Putin is not looking good. He struts around, like the dictator that he is. But he's on the defensive, and Russians know it. So that's one audience. Another audience is the Europeans. They want to make sure the Americans are going to stay the course. A lot of the European countries, Poland, the Baltic states, are exposed. And they trust America. They're trusting the Biden administration more and more. But they want to hear that America is going to be there for Ukraine and for them. And it's also a good message to the West European great powers, the Germans and the French especially, that the Americans are serious about this, about supporting Ukraine, that we have our own interests at stake, that Ukraine's fight, in some sense, is also ours.
And Ambassador, the term or the expression courage is contagious has been used and used again with President Zelenskyy. You are someone who has been in these long, painstaking diplomatic discussions. Explain at a human level how Zelensky's, the way he carries himself, the way he has behaved in these 300 days, what difference that has made in those diplomatic engagements all across the globe.
So here's the story. The Biden administration was spot on right that Putin intended. But they also expected that Putin's armies would overrun Ukraine pretty quickly. They were wrong, but they they urged Zelenskyy to evacuate, to go from Kyiv, the capital, to someplace in Western Ukraine that was safer. And Zelenskyy famously said, "The fight is here. I don't need a ride. I need ammunition." And at that point, the American administration was quite taken. This was a moment of courage, personal courage, because the Russians were trying to murder him. And he meant it. The Ukrainians turned back the Russian assault, and the Biden administration began to realize that the Ukrainians could not only make a fight of it, they could succeed. That came from Zelenskyy himself.
And Caitlin, as we see, certainly we see the House floor there. We see members of the president's cabinet. That looks like it's Dennis McDonough. Secretary of Veterans Affairs. How did this all come about? Speaking of courage, sneaking out of the country is not so easy.
Absolutely. This was very carefully orchestrated, and there were obvious concerns about President Zelensky's security, and those concerns, of course, still remain. And so this was carefully orchestrated, very closely held for those security reasons, flown over here on a U.S. aircraft.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Ambassador Daniel Fried, we thank you both for being with us. And we are right on the cusp here now as we look at pictures ahead of President Volodymyr Zelensky's address to a joint meeting of the Congress of the United States. And we'll take you now to a CBS News special report.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Major Garrett in the nation's capital. In just a few moments, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy will address a rare joint meeting of Congress. It will mark the end of a dramatic day here in Washington. This is Zelenskyy's first trip outside of Ukraine since the Russian invasion began exactly 300 days ago. And it comes just a day after Zelenskyy met face-to-face with troops on the front lines. Earlier today, Zelenskyy visited the White House, met with President Biden and key members of his national security team. The president promised more military aid, including at least one long-sought Patriot surface-to-air missile system. Mr. Biden said the U.S. will stand with Ukraine, quote, as long as it takes. Tonight's speech is a chance for the Ukrainian leader to thank Congress and, not incidentally, American taxpayers for their support. And it comes at a time when Russia has been pounding the Ukrainian power grid, plunging millions of Ukrainian civilians into the cold and dark of winter. Lawmakers later this week are set to vote on a year-end spending package that includes roughly $45 billion in additional emergency assistance to Ukraine. Tonight's speech is in the House chamber, as you can see. Vice President Kamala Harris is there, along with members of the diplomatic corps. President Zelenskyy, in a few moments, will be introduced by the House Sergeant-at-Arms, Major General William Walker. With me tonight is Face the Nation moderator and Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan. Margaret, it's worth noting that when Russia's invasion began 300 days ago, the Biden administration wasn't sure President Zelenskyy's government would last 3 days,
That's right.
let alone 300. Now he is well enough and the country is strong enough to send him here to the United States.
It really is just a statement of incredible resistance, and they have defied the odds. A large part of that is because of Russia's underperformance, overestimating Russian strength, but also because of the intelligence that the United States is funneling to Ukrainian military officials, the weaponry and the funding. So the United States is not a direct player in this fight, but a direct funder of the fight and really leading the way for the West to continue to stand with them, though not directly in the fight itself. But to be clear here, Russia still controls 18% of Ukrainian territory, and it is that bit that the Ukrainians want to push Russia back from. And there is preparation underway, according to Ukrainian generals, for a new offensive by Russia as soon as next month.
And Margaret, this entire trip kept tightly under wraps until just this morning.
It's really incredible to have it kept under wraps in Washington. As you know, not much actually stays secret. They had talked for a while about him coming and finding the right moment, and it is so symbolic that it is this moment in Christmas week as the largest amount of aid is set to pass through Congress to date, this $45 billion, if it is approved in the next few days, but also at that key moment for his people to show that there still is this symbolic alliance, despite the political rumblings that they may be hearing as Republicans are set to gain control. And some progressives and many Republicans have started to say $100 billion. Should that funding continue in the way it has in the future, or will there be more scrutiny of it?
And there's also some conversation about, are the Europeans meeting the American amount? Because it seems to many members of Congress, at least on the Republican side, that the stakes are at least as large for Europe, if not larger than it is for the United States.
Well, certainly for those frontline states, they are, and there is that risk of escalation that so many of the European capitals are afraid of, that they would be the one to take that errant Russian missile, not the United States. But the other thing to say here is the European economy has felt very strongly the impact of this war, as they have had Russian oil and gas supplies cut off, some by choice, some not. So they have felt the ramifications of this, and it has been painful for them. So making some of these choices to stay committed comes at a very real cost. When someone's writing their rent check, they feel it in a real way.
And you talk to ambassadors throughout the region. I have the occasion to on some instances as well. And European ambassadors will tell you, yes, maybe not in dollar amounts, but many European countries, especially those frontline states, have also taken in great numbers of Ukrainian refugees. That's not a line item thing. It's a matter of humanitarian, but it's a gesture that's important and must be calculated just the same.
It is incredible, particularly Poland, a country that was not so welcoming, I will say, to a number of refugees coming from the Middle East and Africa over the past few years, but very much embracing and bringing into their homes some of their fellow Ukrainians. But it really was, as a fairly cynical diplomat said to me, I wonder if the European response would have been as robust if Vladimir Putin hadn't decided to bomb a European capital. It was that terror and that fear, because as you remember, Major, it was right up until February 23rd that European leaders were really doubting that Vladimir Putin would go ahead with this. The United States warned it was coming, and they were unfortunately correct.
Margaret, I will let the audience know that what you see looks very similar to the choreography of a State of the Union address. It, of course, is not one, but what you see now are members of the Senate and House Escort Committee walking down the central aisle of the House of Representatives, which means President Zelenskyy is due to arrive in the chamber at any moment. That choreography, familiar, and a head of state does occasionally get an invitation to come to Congress, but this feels particularly historic because President Zelenskyy knows he's on the brink of seeing one chamber of Congress change political hands and wants to let them know what's on his mind.
And President Zelenskyy has used his celebrity, his ability to communicate in a really effective way for Ukraine to really punch above their weight. And he has often gone directly to European, groups of young people and not to their leaders to appeal for popular support.
Sergeant at Arms, Major General William Walker.
Madam Speaker, the President of Ukraine.
Standing ovation, loud applause for President Zelenskyy. He shook the hand right there of Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, a significant voice in Republican circles, and a bipartisan ally in terms of existing and quite possibly future funding for Ukraine as it defends itself against Russian aggression.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Get on slide. Thank you so much. Героям слава!
Members, members of Congress,
I think it's too much.
I think it is. Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you His Excellency Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of the Ukraine.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's too much for me. All this for our great people. Thank you so much. Dear Americans, in all states, cities, and communities, all those who value freedom and justice, who cherish it as strongly as we Ukrainians, in all our cities, in each and every family, I hope my words of respect and gratitude resonate in each American heart. Madam Vice President, I thank you for your efforts in helping Ukraine. Madam Speaker, you bravely visited Ukraine during the full-fledged war. Thank you very much. A great honor. Thank you. Great privilege to be here. Dear members of the Congress, representatives of both parties who also visited Kyiv, esteemed congressmen and senators from both parties who will visit Ukraine, I'm sure, in the future. Dear representatives of diaspora, present in this chamber and spread across the country, dear journalists. It's a great honor for me to be at the US Congress and speak to you and all Americans. Against all odds and doom and gloom scenarios, Ukraine didn't fall. Ukraine is alive and kicking. Thank you. And it gives me good reason to share with you our first joint victory. We defeated Russia in the battle for minds of the world. We have no fear, nor should anyone in the world have it. Ukrainians gained this victory, and it gives us courage, which inspires the entire world. Americans gained this victory, and that's why you have succeeded in uniting the global community to protect freedom and international law. Europeans gained this victory, and that's why Europe is now stronger and more independent than ever. The Russian tyranny has lost control over us. And it will never influence our minds again. Yet, we have to do whatever it takes to ensure that countries of the global south also gain such victory. I know one more, I think, very important thing. The Russians will stand a chance to be free only when they defeat the Kremlin in their minds. Yet, the battle continues, and we have to defeat the Kremlin on the battlefield. Yes, This battle is not only for the territory, for this or another part of Europe. The battle is not only for life, freedom and security of Ukrainians or any other nation which Russia attempts to conquer. This struggle will define in what world our children and grandchildren will live, and then their children and grandchildren. It will define whether it will be a democracy of Ukrainians and for Americans for all. This battle cannot be frozen or postponed. It cannot be ignored, hoping that the ocean or something else will provide a protection. From the United States to China, from Europe to Latin America, and from Africa to Australia, the world is too interconnected and interdependent to allow someone to stay aside and at the same time to feel safe when such a battle continues. Our two nations are allies in this battle. And next year will be a turning point. I know it, the point when Ukrainian courage and American resolve must guarantee the future of our common freedom, the freedom of people who stand for their values. Ladies and gentlemen, Americans, yesterday before coming here to Washington, D.C., I was at the front line in our Bakhmut, in our stronghold in the east of Ukraine, in the Donbas. The Russian military and mercenaries have been attacking Bakhmut non-stop since May. They have been attacking it day and night, but Bakhmut stands. Last year, 70,000 people lived there in Bakhmut, in this city, and now only few civilians stay. Every inch of that land is soaked in blood. Roaring guns sound every hour. Trenches in the Donbas change hands several times a day in fierce combat and even hand fighting, but the Ukrainian Donbas stands. Russians use everything they have against Bakhmut and our beautiful cities. The occupiers have a significant advantage in artillery. They have an advantage in ammunition. They have much more missiles and planes than we ever had. And it's true, but our defense forces stand. And we all are proud of them. The Russians' tactic is primitive. They burn down and destroy everything they see. They send thugs to the front lines. They send convicts to the war. They threw everything against us, similar to the other tyranny, which is in the Battle of the Bulge. Threw everything it had against the free world, just like the brave American soldiers, which held their lines and fought back Hitler's forces during the Christmas of 1944. Brave Ukrainian soldiers are doing the same to Putin's forces this Christmas. Ukraine holds its lines and will never surrender. So here is the front line. The tyranny which has no lack of cruelty against the lives of free people. And your support is crucial, not just to stand in such fight, but to get to the turning point, to win on the battlefield. We have artillery. Yes. Thank you. We have it. Is it enough? Honestly, not really. To ensure Bakhmut is not just a stronghold that holds back the Russian army, but for the Russian army to completely pull out, more cannons and shells are needed. If so, just like the Battle of Saratoga, the fight for Bakhmut will change the trajectory of our war for independence and for freedom. If your patriots stop the Russian terror against our cities, it will let Ukrainian patriots work to the full to defend our freedom. When Russia cannot reach our cities, but its artillery, it tries to destroy them with missile attacks. More than that, Russia found an ally in this genocidal policy, Iran. Iranian deadly drones sent to Russia in hundreds became a threat to our critical infrastructure. That is how one terrorist has found the other. It is just a matter of time when they will strike against your other allies. If we do not stop them now, we must do it. I believe there should be no taboos between us in our alliance. Ukraine never asked the American soldiers to fight on our land instead of us. I assure you that Ukrainian soldiers can perfectly operate American tanks and planes themselves. Financial assistance is also critically important, and I would like to thank you very much. Thank you for both financial packages you have already provided us with and the ones you may be willing to decide on. Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security and democracy that we handle in the most responsible way. Russia could stop its aggression, really, if it wanted to, but you can speed up our victory. I know it. And it will prove to any potential aggressor that no one can succeed in breaking national borders, no one committing atrocities and reigning over people against their will. It would be naive to wait for steps towards peace from Russia, which enjoys being a terrorist state. Russians are still poisoned by the Kremlin. The restoration of international legal order is our joint task. We need peace. Yes, Ukraine has already offered proposals, which I just discussed with President Biden, our peace formula, 10 points which should and must be implemented for our joint security, guaranteed for decades ahead. and the summit which can be held. I'm glad to stress that President Biden supported our peace initiative today. Each of you, ladies and gentlemen, can assist in the implementation to ensure that America's leadership remains solid, bicameral, and bipartisan. Thank you. You can strengthen sanctions to make Russia feel how ruinous its aggression truly is. It is in your power, really, to help us bring to justice everyone who started this unprovoked and criminal war. Let's do it. Let terrorists let the terrorist state be held responsible for its terror and aggression and compensate all losses done by this war. Let the world see that the United States are here. Ladies and gentlemen, Americans, in 2 days, we will celebrate Christmas, maybe candlelit. Not because it's more romantic, no, but because there will be no electricity. Millions won't have neither heating nor running water. All of these will be the result of Russian missile and drone attacks on our energy infrastructure. But we do not complain. We do not judge and compare whose life is easier. Your well-being is the product of your national security, the result of your struggle for independence and your many victories. We, Ukrainians, will also go through our war of independence and freedom with dignity and success. We'll celebrate Christmas. Celebrate Christmas, and even if there is no electricity, the light of our faith in ourselves will not be put out. If Russian missiles attack us, we'll do our best to protect ourselves. If they attack us with Iranian drones and our people will have to go to bomb shelters on Christmas Eve, Ukrainians will still sit down at the holiday table and cheer up each other. And we don't have to know everyone's wish, as we know that all of us, millions of Ukrainians, wish the same: victory. Only victory. We already built strong Ukraine with strong people, strong army, strong institutions together with you. We developed strong security guarantees for our country and for entire Europe and the world together with you. And also together with you, we'll put in place everyone who will defy freedom. Put in. This will be the basis to protect democracy in Europe and the world over. Now, on the special Christmas time, I want to thank you, all of you. I thank every American family which cherishes the warmth of its home and wishes the same warmth to other people. I thank President Biden and both parties at the Senate and the House for your invaluable assistance. I thank your cities and your citizens who supported Ukraine this year, who hosted our Ukrainians, our people, who waved our national flags, who acted to help us. Thank you all. From everyone who is now at the front line, from everyone who is evading victory. Standing here today, I recall the words of the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which is, I think, so good for this moment. The American people, in their righteous might, will win through to absolute victory. The Ukrainian people will win too, absolutely. I know that everything depends on us, on Ukrainian armed forces, yet so much depends on the world. So much in the world depends on you. When I was in Bakhmut yesterday, our heroes gave me the flag, the battle flag, the flag of those who defend Ukraine, Europe, and the world at the cost of their lives. They asked me to bring this flag to you, to the US Congress, to members of the House of Representatives and senators whose decisions can save millions of people. So let these decisions be taken. Let this flag stay with you, ladies and gentlemen. This flag is a symbol of our victory in this war. We stand, we fight, and we will win because we are united, Ukraine, America, and the entire free world. Just one thing, if I can, the last thing, thank you so much. May God protect our brave troops and citizens. May God forever bless the United States of America. Merry Christmas and happy, victorious New Year. Slava Ukraini!
The day after Christmas, 1941, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill addressed a joint session of Congress to outline the stakes of World War II. The conflict then and the conflict in Ukraine are not the same, but it seems more than coincidental, in fact strategic. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy repeatedly referred to battles in World War II, even America's World War II President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to describe the stakes for the world in this particular conflict. I'm joined at the table by Face the Nation moderator and our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Margaret Brennan. Margaret, your impressions?
You know, it's incredible watching this exchange of flags here, Major, just to think that President Zelenskyy was literally on the front lines of a war zone in Bakhmut yesterday, in the east of the country, and now he is in the nation's capital. He is a wartime president giving what was a stirring address to Congress at a time when our politics doesn't feel very congratulatory of actually getting things done. One of the few points to now has been bipartisan. So the Speaker of the House just said something there.
That American flag flew over the U.S. Capitol today, taken as a prized possession by the leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. as part of a ceremonial and symbolically deeply important for Ukrainians exchange of flags, uniting President Zelenskyy hopes America to Ukraine, not just for calendar year 2022, but as he said, calendar year 2023, a turning point, and he predicted a year of victory.
It's a big prediction because they are shoring themselves up for what could be a Russian offensive in January or February. And the acknowledgement that while the war has not gone well for Russia, the UK estimates they've lost about 100,000 of their own troops to desertion or death or injury, that Vladimir Putin is continuing to double down. And so this brutal moment that Volodymyr Zelenskyy was describing of not losing faith, he was really seeking a connection there with the American people to hopefully keep that alliance there. He spoke in English. He rarely does that. And he appealed to that sense of holiday spirit, talking about, you know, even though we will be celebrating by candlelight, without electricity, without warmth, we know Americans want to share the warmth of their homes, that holiday spirit with us.
Margaret Brennan, thank you so very much. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and for some of you on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington.
Hello, I'm John Dickerson. Welcome to CBS News Prime Time. Against all odds, that's how Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy described his people's fight for freedom. The United States Congress welcomed Zelenskyy with a 2-minute standing ovation on the House floor. He called on Congress to continue aiding Ukraine in their battle and thanked all Americans for their ongoing support.
Against all odds and doom and gloom scenarios, Ukraine didn't fall. Ukraine is alive and kicking. We have no fear, nor should anyone in the world have it. Ukraine's gained this victory, and it gives us courage, which inspires the entire world. Europe is now stronger and more independent than ever. The Russian tyranny has lost control over us. The world is too interconnected and interdependent to allow someone to stay aside and at the same time to feel safe when such a battle continues.
Joining me now is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe and Ambassador Ivo Daalder, a former U.S. ambassador to NATO and current president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Ambassador, what did you make of the speech?
You know, he's a remarkable leader who's taken a remarkable period of time combining the visit to Bakhmut, the city that has been under constant bombardment now since May, just yesterday, to a visit to the citadel of democracy, the capital of the United States. And he, I think very deftly, as he has done for so long now, linked the fate of Ukraine and what is happening in Ukraine to the freedom of not just Ukraine, but of Europe, of the United States, indeed of the entire free world, and basically made the point, as he has done so effectively before, that this fight is one that the Ukrainians are fighting, not only for them, but they're fighting it for everyone. And coming to the Congress at a time that it is debating whether to continue to support Ukraine with the financial means and the military means it needs is timely and presumably not coincidental.
And Ambassador, that is singing out of a hymnal that for a long time was the main song that the American foreign policy establishment sang, and that sounding those notes would have a receptive audience. Give me your assessment of how receptive the political system is in America right now for that kind of message, that we are all interconnected and that democracy is, that this is a fight for something larger than simply the territory of Ukraine.
Well, as you pointed out, I think at the outset, it is not a coincidence, frankly, that he went back to World War II, because that was the time that united the entire country. When we were attacked on December 7th, 1941, the entire country united behind a singular effort to defend not just the United States, but to liberate Europe and Asia from the yoke of tyranny. And making that case is something that I think Americans deeply understand. At the same time, politically, of course, we are seeing, particularly among Republican voters, an increasing sense that maybe this has gone on too far. And we find in our own polling that we have done that while support remains strong, it is something that needs to be reawakened. And I think the President Zelenskyy tried to do that just today.
Ed O'Keefe, what stood out to you in the address tonight?
A few things, John. First of all, he was blunt. He said, thank you for what you've done. Thank you so much, but we need much more. And what you've done, frankly, isn't nearly enough. Also notable that he said, if you don't want to fly the planes or drive the tanks, you can train my troops to do it for us, but it will be on your behalf. Also notable, I thought, and perhaps the ambassador heard this too, Zelenskyy there in front of the U.S. Congress in prime time across the United States called for regime change in Russia and for an expansion of this conflict to include Iran and the fact that it is now working with Russia to provide unmanned aerial drones to take out parts of Ukrainian infrastructure and Ukrainian civilian society. Those are comments, those are statements that U.S. officials have not made before, at least not in this kind of a setting, and it's notable that he did it tonight. There is symmetry to this discussion of World War II. 81 years ago, Winston Churchill came to Washington next week and said the United States needs to join with the United Kingdom and Europe in this fight. In her message to lawmakers, encouraging to come back to Washington for this speech tonight, Speaker Pelosi noted that her father, the former Congressman Thomas D'Alessandro, had been in the audience that day when the British leader made that speech. For those that watch these kinds of speeches and know the pageantry of them, tonight was the last time Speaker Pelosi will stand there with the gavel. So the symmetry for her in all of this as well, someone who has gone to Ukraine, who spent time going to Taiwan this year to defend that democracy, that too is an element of the drama we've seen play out today.
And Ed, the president said that the U.S. will support the Ukrainians as long as it takes, but he didn't say, as you've pointed out, he didn't say no matter what they ask for. How does the White House see this dramatic moment and what the next year looks like in realistic terms as powerful emotionally as this moment is in terms of what the U.S. can do?
So it's probably too early to know at this point because in many respects, I don't think they understood or knew exactly what he would say to Congress tonight. Or lay out the things we just discussed. We do know, as he said, that he discussed this 10-point plan for peace in hopes of having peace talks at some point next year with Russia. The president's attitude is, if that's what Ukraine wants and it believes it's in a position to do so, we'll back them up. It's up to Russia, to Vladimir Putin, to decide it's time to end the conflict and head to the negotiating table. So we'll see ultimately where Zelenskyy's plan goes. Our early indication is that Zelenskyy in the meetings with the American president today didn't bring a laundry list of asks, but merely said thank you and let's figure out going forward how to sustain that support. I also found it notable tonight, a world leader knew to drop the words bipartisan and bicameral in an address to a Congress that's about to undergo a bit of a leadership transition, understanding the politics of the House, where there's so many Republicans now skeptical about continuing to write such large checks to the Ukrainians. Yeah. Also notable, he said there, we're responsible stewards of your money.
Yeah, he used the word bipartisan quite a lot. Ambassador, as the final question to you, what does the next chapter look like? Or maybe we don't have a crystal ball, but help us think with wisdom about what the next hurdles are for the next period in this conflict.
Well, the real next hurdle is the continuation of the battle on the ground. It is clear that the Russians are exhausted from fighting this fight, but so are the Ukrainians. They're in some ways fighting on fumes and enthusiasm. They need more weapons. They need more artillery shells. They need more bullets. They need the kinds of things that that President Zelenskyy was talking about. They also will need to think about having other capabilities in order to bring the fight further against the Russians in Ukraine. Some of those capabilities were announced today. But we will see a continuing pressure to say we probably need more mobility. both in the air and on the ground and longer range in order to continue to take the fight against the Russians, to push them out of Ukraine, to make sure that one day Ukraine is not only free and democratic, but that its territory has been restored to the boundaries that everyone recognizes and that existed as of 1991. So I think that's what 2023 holds. Not likely to be peace. Unfortunately, a lot more fighting.
Ambassador Ivo Dalder, thank you very much. And Ed O'Keefe for us at the White House. Thank you, Ed. Let's bring in now Asami Terachima. She's a reporter for the Kyiv Independent and joins us now from Kyiv. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, as far as I can tell, but how are people reacting, if they are, to the speech the president just gave?
Well, the speech is so powerful, and it's what Ukrainians wanted to hear, that, invest in helping Ukraine militarily is an investment to global security. And this has been what many Ukrainians have been advocating for, because Ukraine really needs more Western weapons to defend itself so that, the whole Europe can be safer.
And what is the feeling about the assistance so far from America, just on the street, and how do you hear America talked about in your day-to-day interactions?
So a lot of people know what Patriot air defense system is already, because Ukrainians have been talking about it for months, and Ukrainian officials have been, asking over and over again to NATO allies to get the hold of this very powerful air defense system. And finally, the US has announced it on December 21st. So this has really raised the morale, because obviously we've been, since October 10th, we had Russia launch mass attacks on Ukraine, and energy situation is very dire, and it's getting worse as the weather gets colder, and there are millions without heat and without electricity. So this is a positive step forward, but it looks like the system is not going to arrive before April, before spring. So it will, hopefully this system will arrive sooner than we expect.
The Ukrainian people have been extraordinary in their resilience and the maintenance of hope throughout all of this. 300 days. Is it still strong? Is the president referred to the strength and determination of his people, but how do you see it in your interactions?
Even though it's very cold, it's getting colder, and the situation with power, it makes it very difficult mentally, and also like it's just difficult to also continue working and carry on daily lives as people used to. Even after the full-scale invasion began, many people have been working full time, and now it's much harder to work, more expensive. But nevertheless, people are still determined more than ever to. Until Ukraine achieves its victory, and people, I don't think the morale has gone down anyway at all. It's only been rising. It's only gotten stronger because people are determined to win faster, and hopefully that will happen to Ukraine.
All right, Asami Terachima in Kyiv, Ukraine. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
House Ways and Means Committee says it will release portions from 6 years of former President Trump's tax returns in the coming days. The committee released 2 reports Tuesday night, one from its members and another from the Joint Committee on Taxation. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian takes a closer look.
After years of fighting their release, tonight former President Trump's tax returns are one step closer to becoming public, following a strictly party-line vote by the House Ways and Means Committee.
The public has a right to have a certain level of transparency.
According to the panel's report, the IRS did not do a mandatory audit of the former president during his first 2 years in office and never